Namaskar and very good afternoon to all participants. I welcome you after the tea break. Once more, I would like to inform all the attendees that all the information regarding the summit can be conveniently accessed by scanning the QR code provided on the summit notepads and badges. It is with great honor and privilege to welcome you all for the enlightening session focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, steering towards a progressive future. I welcome our esteemed speakers who are here with us today on dais, please. I request our chair and moderator, Ms. Usha Subramaniam, Country President, Grundfos India, to lead the way and initiate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Very nice to be here, and more importantly, wonderful to be here discussing a topic without which one could argue a conference on sustainability is not nearly complete. So our topic for the day is diversity, equity, and inclusion towards a progressive future. And together with me, I have a very distinguished panel, as you can see. And I will come in a moment to introducing each one of them. And we hope to, in the next 1 hour, touch on as many aspects and as many frames of this hugely vast and interesting area as possible. From a representation and experience point of view, this is really a broadly diverse panel as well, so looking very much forward to listening to all of them. And we will hopefully towards the end also have some time for Q&A from the audience. So this area of DE&I has, over the last few years at least, gained quite a bit of traction. And you could argue that the why behind it is becoming more and more well articulated, perhaps driven a lot by the global organizations where the first steps have been taken more. And we in India are also listening to more about the area. Indian companies and various Indian organizations are working also a lot with it. But there is perhaps also agreement that a lot more needs to be done, can be done, and the scope is just really wide. And in the context of today's conference, I think the whole area of social inclusion also plays such a big role. So before sort of getting into the area, let me introduce the panelists, and let me start with Ms. Rumjum Chatterjee. She is the chairperson of the CII National Council on Women's Empowerment and Inclusion, and also the co-founder of Infravision Foundation. Then we have Ms. Sangeeta Robinson, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for PVR Cinemas. We have Ms. Nagma Mullah, who is the CEO of Edelgive Foundation. Ms. Priya Chakrabarti, the HR Director for Cargill in India. Ms. Tanya Chatterjee, Head of Sustainability for the NatWest Group in India. And Mr. Mohit Bansal, Head of Public Affairs for Ikea India. And Mohit, I have to say that since morning I have been witnessing a few panels, and it was usually one female in them. And on this panel of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it happens to be that we are the other way around. Well, so a little bit about what we also do. Let me start off by introducing the topic also from a organizational perspective that I represent. So I think this area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not nearly enough is also spent on the fact that each one of these is a different world in itself and with varying challenges. So of course, diversity, I think it's easy to understand, right? A set of unique characteristics that belong only to an individual, to a group, whatever. And in that sense, I think being in India, it's very easy to understand because there is an innate diversity built into the way we are as a nation. Equity, on the other hand, and that's also, two of these words are also the theme of this entire conference, equitable inclusion. So equity, on the other hand, of course, means that the starting point for everybody is not the same, and therefore, adjustments need to be made so that the end result is fair and just. And sometimes the starting point differences are so huge that there is an unfair advantage to a certain part. And so how do we balance that? It's all about being equitable. And inclusion, you could say the first among equals, I would say in these three at least, because in the absence of which we do not really have any long-term sustainable effect or impact. So the ability to bring people together. So in Grundfos, we have actually a long history of working with this. And you could say that the starting point of being focused on people as a value makes it a little bit easier because everything revolves around the people. And without being mindful of this topic, one cannot really go forward. So it starts there from a philosophical or an intent point of view. But there's also so much research these days that amply proves that in order for a business enterprise to succeed, and then you could by extension say that in order for a society to succeed, having different perspectives on the table, being able to bring them together and move them, propel them forward, that without that there really isn't any possibility of success. So research has demonstrated that a diverse, inclusive organization has an impact on innovation, creativity, employee retention, profitability, really business success. There's enough research out there which actually speaks to all of this. At Grundfos, besides it being kind of closely tied to our values, we also try to work with it in a structured way in the sense that there is, of course, in order to succeed with it, there is an policy and procedure angle to it. Then there is the whole leadership angle to it. And then there is how much do we put it right through to the frontline employee. And for this purpose, we actually work with the concept of a council. So we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion council in our company. So it's not sitting with the HR department, or it's not sitting with the senior leadership. There is a council that actually decides and drives this agenda. And there are targets linked to, we have specific areas of focus like women, differently abled. And then when it comes to measurement, we measure leadership commitment to it. So our annual surveys are actually measuring how much do we actually live this. And in order to drive this through, then of course, it's done through employee resource groups. So it's not, again, to make sure that there is ownership at every level. So these are at least some of the things that we try and do in our organization. And just before I open up the discussion towards the panel, I would like to show you a small video. There's supposed to be sound. why don't we come back to it at the end? So I'm going to start off by asking the panel now. We've seen a shift in this area of DE&I, and each one of you has worked with it in sort of many different contexts. So how have you, my opening question to each one of you is, how have you actually seen it evolve? Are we indeed moving the needle? Is there buy-in to the topic, and how do you actually see the impact? And could I start with you, Ms. Rumjam?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Usha. I have spent 30 years working with a group of mostly men in a sector that is understood to be the domain of the men only, in the infrastructure sector, right? We founded this company way back in 30 years. And from my own perspective within the company, and from what I see around me, because we have played a very active role within CII, taking this agenda forward, I think we have a long way to go. Having said that, I would also like to remind ourselves that CII had initiated the discussion on women's participation in the workforce way back in 1998. But it has taken us a good 15 to 16 years before we could bring it into the agenda of either a state council or even the national council. It's a slow move forward, but a move nonetheless. That's on the women's agenda, which till about 5 to 6 years ago would be the only diversity topic that one would consider. But I think we have now seen and heard a lot more particularly from, like you rightly mentioned, global companies, multinationals, who for them it is part of their business agenda, right? And making sure that we are tracking and making progress on that. We have a long way to go. But the fact that industry is now aware of the issues, that sustainability will involve working on these issues, is now something that we have come to appreciate. And therefore today, while this is a topic that is not only a part of the Sustainability Summit, well, this morning some of us in this panel had also been in another conference whose whole agenda was on diversity and inclusion. So I think we are making moves, albeit a little slowly, and there's a long way to go.
Thank you. Could I maybe ask you to answer the...
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And I'm very, very aware of the caliber, acumen, and experience on this platform. So I would actually like to focus on two elements of this topic and go a little off, because I think that's very, very important. Before we even talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, I'd like to pull us all back multiple steps and talk about perception and narrative. We are getting there. They are matrix. It is becoming a business agenda. More and more women are visible, are there in the workforce. But I don't want to talk about the fact that in spite of that, the women in workforce number has fallen from about 30% in 1990s to 18% in 2020. The fact that out of the 2,000 listed companies in this country, only 100 have women CEOs. I still don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the fact that do we really perceive what women as a stakeholder are doing in our work environments? Because I see a slight problem here. In the kind of ecosystem we are all coming from, most men till a few years ago would realize that women got periods only after they got married. Coming from robust, protected environments, not knowing what it takes for a woman to show up, either on the dinner table or at work, is something that we as a society have created. It's not the man's fault. It's a societal problem. As men get more and more exposed, and as we start including and making our teams diverse, it's very important to first also address what are we seeing when we see women. Saying that we come with empathy, we make leadership more empathetic, more responsible, we make the company better. We are not mood elevators for management. We are not rehabilitation centers for people. We need to do better when we talk of stakeholders being women who are just different in gender, but maybe are equally good at their work, equally good at math, science, driving. And I think addressing the fact that perception has a lot to do with what happens with diversity as an agenda in any company is extremely important. The second thing is, what do we do once we navigate and have these teams? What is our narrative? We don't become a great company because we are diverse. We become a responsible company because we are diverse. We have to bring the romance of this down. Doing good cannot be celebrated so much. Doing good should become our least common denominator. And doing good means hiring without the bias of whether it's a he or a she or a they. And I feel that at this introduction, where everyone will come with their best practice of the company, I come from the development sector. It's very important to place that while we talk about everything and how we're doing better as an industry, as a society, as a family, we address that at a unit level, what we think of people, women and men, and what we do and say and speak about them once we include them holds a lot of weight in how our future will unfold with this agenda. So I'll just pause here.
Thanks a lot, Nagma. Being good as a starting point and as a basic, very, very valid expectation. Can I turn to you, Priya, to share a little bit about how you are doing with the topic in Kargil?
Sure, thank you, Usha. And I don't think there's anything that I can deny with the fact that, in terms of how we have moved. And I've been privileged to be with the corporate sector for, or rather, mostly with largely multinational organizations for the last 2 decades of my career. And having said that, even there, the way I look at it, DEI has moved from Women's Day celebrations where roses were given to women to probably more meaningful conversations. And I think that's one of the way, while it is on a lighter note, but it is very significant because I think we've sort of at least started to acknowledge that we need to move beyond tokenisms as far as DEI is concerned, or any, this thing. Having said that, I think, yes, we do have a long way to go. And like I come from, I represent Kargil here. If I were to just sort of, give some numbers, our global leadership, 50% of global leadership is women. Is that the same number in India? No, it is not. Same organization, different countries. And having said that, have we made strides? Yes, we have. And as a corporate sector, we do realize that, there is a huge amount of responsibility of whatever we do in our worlds to kind of, that would be what would be translated into the numbers, which would take probably 5, 10, maybe 15 years to really come in. Having said that, the movements need to happen. So I'll probably just share a little bit of how we are looking at it in Kargil. I think in Kargil, of course, like a lot of other organizations, it's top and center. It's one of our key agendas from a leadership perspective. Our global leadership, our executive leadership team tracks it. We have targets, etc. But it's not just the what's, it's also the hows that we focus on. So one thing which we realized in Kargil is that if this movement were to be not just progressive, but to be sustainable, one entity or one Kargil can't do it alone. It needs to be a shared responsibility. The element of partnership becomes very, very important. And hence, How do we look at it? So we look at it from very simply on 3 pillars. We look at it from workplace, workforce, and marketplace. What do I, very briefly touching upon each of these. Workplace is basic infrastructure, and interestingly, very surprisingly, we talk about diversity. There are a lot of facilities, and I'm coming in from an MNC, and I think probably we'll be better off the curve. There are a lot of places where the infrastructure, basic infrastructure for women is not available. Forget about hiring people. So I think somewhere at a very basic hygiene level, and I'm not talking about mothers' rooms, or these are still more fancy. I'm talking about something as basic as washrooms. So I think inclusive facilities, not just in our own premises, but our distributor premises, etc. So that's the first piece that, and of course, they're supporting policies around women returning to after motherhood or after their life changes, that would be there. So that's something which we consider we look at within workplace. Workforce is where we actually work with people within Kargil, developing, coaching, talking about psychological safety, etc. And third and most important is we try to go beyond Kargil's boundaries to look at our communities. So there are programs that, for example, we have recently tied up with IIT Madras to really sponsor a program to actually foster skills around STEM education, which basically we encourage women, not just women, mostly underserved population in the country to really participate in. And Kargil sponsors part of that program. We also work with women poultry farmers to actually, we kind of incubate certain these things because we are in the poultry business as well. So we work with women farmers. So essentially, just to kind of in a nutshell, I think partnerships is very, very important. It doesn't remain within the walls or the confines of the organization that we operate in. Till the time we are able to reach out and make this a larger movement or larger partnership beyond getting the community, social infra involved, the significant changes might take way longer than what it could be. So that I will probably just rest with that.
Thank you, Priya. I'm going to go over to you, Mohit, to share a little bit about what's happening in IKEA.
Thanks a lot, Usha, and thanks for having me. And you also acknowledge the fact that I'm like the D in the entire panel, so I cover the diversity bit. So I think my role was largely that, if I'm not wrong. But anyways, that was on a lighter note. I think a lot has been said, in this panel, and I agree with a lot of these points that we have come a long way, but this is just the tipping of the iceberg. We still have a long way to catch up as well. Maybe it has just moved from conversations, like a Women's Day to something more meaningful. And the fact that, we are talking about DI in a sustainability summit speaks for itself. We are not doing any favor by doing DI. It's good business to do good business. If we are diversified, I think we are far more fruitful, and hence will be sustainable. And I'm talking, on a more selfish note. If we are diversified, it will actually lead to more business, more profits. If you have to talk that ways also, I think it makes absolutely sense, and we are not doing it, only for the society. If I have to start by talking some numbers, at IKEA, DI has been around for long, and globally we are known for that. And we have carried, this tradition to India as well. But it was not the same always. We had challenges, globally and in India. And I think, Sangeeta, you were mentioning that, you have seen some of the IKEA stores in India, and they look, the same as you go elsewhere. But I must also add that, even our culture looks same. In terms of DI policies, what we do, what we achieve, they're also more or less same. And this has been, made deliberately like that. And we have now seen a lot of results coming in as well. For example, in India, we have achieved almost a 50-50 gender ratio across all levels. Not only at the management level, but even at shop floor levels, which was traditionally a male bastion. And, areas like a kitchen installation, or going and fixing something. So across all levels, we have almost a 50-50 gender ratio. And I think that speaks for itself. and we have worked quite hard for it. But the point I'm trying to make, this is just not enough. This is just not enough because this looks good for optics. The larger impact which we can make is when we can do the same thing with our supply chain, with our customers, and the society at large. With all the business which we have in India, we just have 3,000 people, and this is nothing. But in our supply chain, we have 50,000 people, and they're in turn impacting the lives of 500,000 people. And I'm happy to say that we inculcate these things in our supply chain as well. So we call something called I-Way, which is the Ikea way of doing business, and every supplier has to rigorously go through the process. And one of the things there is that you have to inculcate the policies of DII. And I'm talking of a furniture supplier in some far-flung areas who have probably not even heard of these terms. We had some suppliers in Badohi, and now they are getting more women than men. Some of our suppliers have even reached a 90% women number, and we have to ask them to stop. I said, you have to come back. It's not diverse at all. So I think that's the kind of impact which we want to make. And of course, as a consumer-centric organization, we get faced with challenges because we want to practice the same thing not only with our co-workers but also to demonstrate to the customers. Thousands of which visit to our store every day. So I think that's the larger impact which we all should strive to create, and that's how we can reach those numbers at a national level, which Nagma was talking that at those levels we are still not reaching. So maybe there are these some of these corporates which are shining examples, and they should lead the way, but it is just not enough. I'll just stop there.
Can I ask you, Tanya?
Sure. It's such a privilege to hear from the panel members and also to be a part of this esteemed forum. Tanya from Natris Group India. I'll just take a step back because we are in a sustainability summit. It's also important to establish the correlation of sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion. To me, they are absolutely intertwined and interlinked. Mostly because, and the reason is, in the definition of sustainability, it clearly mentions the one that I reckon with is sustainability is development that meets the needs of the current generation without compromising the needs of the future generation to fend for themselves. Largely because of the depleting resources of the planet and overuse by our current generation, we interlink sustainability with environmental sustainability. But diversity, equity, and inclusion is equally important because I subscribe to the fact that environmental, economic, and also ethical related to social and equity are primary focus of sustainability development as well. Just to give some research numbers that I was looking through, which clearly mentions the linkages. Currently, worldwide, we have about 2 billion Gen Z population. And these Gen Z population would prefer to pay 50 to 100% more for a product which is sustainable and also environment friendly. Data clearly tells us that any board which is ethnically diverse will have 43% more profitability. Coming home towards India, I think, Nagma, you mentioned about India labor workforce participation for women. It's quite pathetic at the moment. And IMF is clearly telling us that if we have equal participation of women, we will have 27% of increase in GDP for India. We have about 2.68 crore persons with disability, out of which 50% are literate, 2% of them, 8% of them are graduate. Do we see them enough at our workplaces? That is the question that we need to ask ourselves. Have we prepared ourselves for economic parity? At Natris Group India, what we absolutely are trying to do is we are, of course, known as top employers of, top 5 places for diversity, equity, and inclusion by Great Place to Work. We have been recognized for our work on gender inclusion by UN Women. We have also been recognized by IWEI for LGBTQ+ inclusion. But what we are clearly doing is focusing our ability to influence and recruit more of the transgender population through a specific internship program called Transcend. We are accelerating our efforts on women come back so that the dropout ratio of women do not continue to have a bleeding pipeline of women in the industry as well. We have specific program for persons with disability on development, like you have leadership development programs in every organization. We have a leadership development program for persons with disability called Aspire, and many of the PWD colleagues of mine who have passed out from that program have also progressed to the next level. So the idea is we need to set our house and organization in order, but continue to keep an eye on what we can do externally as well. So a lot of our CSR efforts are going into generating livelihood and also empowerment for education for the women, PWDs, and also various other underrepresented population. So that's a correlation I just wanted to bring home. Over to you, Usha.
Thanks, Tanya. And now I'm going to turn to you, Sangeeta, for how you are driving this within PVR. And you were telling me at lunch that you do this in a very interesting way.
Thank you, Usha. So I will not talk about hiring. I will not talk about women. Not that that's not important, but I think a lot has already been said. I'm going to share today PVR Inox Now initiatives for customers with disabilities. Way back in 2018, late 17, is when we realized that there were a lot of people who were out there who wanted to watch movies but were unable to do so on account of disabilities, age, and certain other factors. Of course, the Rights of People with Disability Bill had been notified, and the government realized that they were also needing to do something. So, of course, we'd also received a couple of notices for some of our cinemas. So, enough reason to put something in place, and we launched Cinema for All. Now, as far as when one looks at that space, one would imagine, oh well, okay, make reasonable accommodation, etc. But it doesn't work like that when it comes to cinema, because each group has their specific needs. So while what I realized was that while getting people with locomotor disabilities, the responsibility lay on the cinema. However, the gap that existed for hearing impaired and visually impaired lay with the producers of the films. Started knocking on a few doors, the big guys. In fact, Red Chillies was at that time launching that film with Shah Rukh Khan and Anushka Sharma, where both the key stars had disabilities. However, it didn't go through. What is required, for those who do not know, for visually impaired, you have something called audio description, which is actually a running commentary describing the scene where there's no verbal or music supporting the narrative. And for hearing impaired, doesn't need too much of imagination. It's actually called captions, but even if you don't have captions, subtitles would do. So in India, we have subtitles to bridge the language gap. So as of today, people with hearing disabilities are making do with subtitles. However, the difference between the captions and subtitles are where every sound is written out. So when you look at Netflix, watch a movie on Netflix, you realize coughing, sad music, etc. Those are captions. And subtitles are only the spoken word. So I realized that it needed more than just PVR to be able to push the envelope. So I started working with the government. We have had 2 rounds of communications that have gone out to Producers Association, to make content accessible. Nothing's happened so far. There have been a couple of public interest litigations and court cases. However, after Pathan, apparently Yash Raj has been directed to make Pathan with audio description. On our end, we are completely ready. We have the technology to be able to stream audio described files through a mobile app called XL Cinema. PVR Inox has an exclusive tie-up with XL Cinema to be able to provide this facility in our cinemas. So how it works is that it synchronizes with the soundtrack in the film and starts playing the audio description from exactly where the person syncs the movie file with. As far as, if you look at the PVR app, or you look at Book My Show or Paytm or any booking platform, you will be able to see cinemas that are accessible. Then there's another category which is coming where cinemas accessible with assistive equipment. You will be able to see auditorium shows that are accessible, because in certain cases 100% audios might not be accessible, as well as seats are marked for a wheelchair user as well as the companion. For people with hearing impairment, we have shows that are discoverable, which are playing with subtitles. And similarly, when that happens, when we do have films with audio description, we will mark those. Those won't need to be marked, because the person sitting next to you could be using audio description, and you will not get disturbed by it at all. So that's the introductory statement from me as far as our accessibility inclusion program. Of course, there's a lot happening on the hiring side as well, but then that's a conversation for another day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta, and thank you all panelists. I think we managed to cover so much breadth of this area, and I think by and large, at least if I had to summarize, there's various efforts going on in different ways. However, a lot remains to be done, especially on the gender front. We heard how the differences are glaringly huge, and of course, also this about, efforts should not have a seasonality flavor to them. They need to be consistent, and they need to be relentless if we have to truly make a movement. But also, I think from what the panelists shared, if there is commitment and if there is true commitment, differences also can be brought. So I'm going to try and ask a few sort of follow-up questions to what you were speaking to, and I will start with you, Rumchum. You were clearly sort of alluding to the fact that not enough has been done. You've been seeing, you've experienced it firsthand for a very long time. However, there's not nearly enough. And you also alluded to sort of multinationals leading the way. So what could be one or two things perhaps that you would, as in your position as chair, recommend or suggest that we could take into the Indian context?
First and foremost, Usha, I think I will broad base the definition of diversity. I think what we are today largely aware of and working on is the gender diversity. And we made little progress on that. And I'll come back to gender diversity in a bit. But I think there are so many other areas that we need to focus attention on, and that is where I think the Indian companies, Indian industry has a huge challenge before them. And that's what I meant, that the multinationals are certainly leading the way. People with disabilities, LGBTQ, right? There are many other areas that we need to, in the marginalized communities of SC/ST, etc. How do we go about it? I think there has to be a movement where I think the laws are mostly in place. People spoke about it, saying that, government has done enough in terms of framing the right laws. But once again, it boils down to saying implementing those in a fair, equitable manner. We don't see that happen. That is perhaps also because there isn't enough awareness uniformly across society. So there is, I think, to my mind, the need for government, industry, and society to come together on this platform. And I think this morning's conference that I was talking about highlighted the fact that the biggest challenges of those with disabilities is really coming from their immediate family. They are unable to see them stepping out and trying to build a career on their own, etc. There is a significant amount of awareness generation, counseling that needs to go in if we are able to get them out and create that inclusive workplace for them. I think we can make a difference. There's got to be concerted effort on all fronts. And therefore, it is government's rules, definitely, they need refreshing from time to time. There have to be schemes that are in place that mandates certain ways of making things happen. Industry, I think, is picking up now, understanding how they can use it. And there are good examples. We know of shop floor which are only operated by women, and the Tatas have done a great job of that. I know that Tata Hitachi has got, their manufacturing facility only with girls. We've seen that the hotel industry has been able to embrace people with disabilities and use them very effectively in housekeeping, in other areas. And I think they're beginning to show that difference, right? So society, industry, government have to work together for us to move forward on this in a more meaningful way.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'll turn to you, Nagma, because you spoke into how it needs to be imbibed, the support. And to me, that is what allyship is all about, right? It is about owning this whole agenda, believing in it, and helping each other sort of come in. But do you think this is something that can be trained, this can be taught, and what role can formal education help to drive this?
The spirit of allyship. Formal education, of course. I think, all numbers show that at an academic level, we almost have an equal number of graduates, or girls actually complete higher education. So while they are being educated, I don't think there is a problem of them feeling that they cannot study or having that imposter syndrome, which we are constantly told we have in corporate India. But it's more than education. It is what we are made to believe when we walk into formal structures. And here again, the context is that formal corporate India or corporate world, all these work structures are structures built by men, with men, for men, because women were not largely around. No fault of men, they were not around. So when we say there are not enough toilets, or there is no, networking is not there for women, it comes because it was made by one particular stakeholder for themselves. They didn't even factor women in. Now women are coming into holds in a structure that was not built or customized for them. So allyship is actually the number one support that can lift what the experience is all about. And what does that even mean? Many times we hear women say that, we don't have networks, or we can't network because we can't go for, after parties, and we can't go for smoking breaks. But just step back and think, women are natural socializers. Women naturally collectivize. Who told us we don't network? We don't network the way corporate structures network. In this entire piece, if we have each other, if we have a few good men also who become part of our networks, and we make it a broader conversation than going out for smoking breaks or meeting after office hours, then we see networking in a different angle. So allyship is almost everything. Second piece is that those women who climb the ladder, we also have a responsibility of ensuring we don't shut the door behind us. For every woman who has crossed a milestone, if she brings in 2 with her, tag 2 along, we have a movement then. You know, a lot of times we are so engrossed in our own struggle of progress and promotion and dealing with whatever the social so-called work-life balance is, that we forget to keep the door ajar behind us. Whatever we've learned needs to be passed on. Whatever we've understood needs to be spread. That is allyship. And that is not something that education can bring. Education can show us how to do it. But that is when you're imbibing the spirit that you can't make this journey alone. There were many before us, and there should be many after us.
Yeah, I was of course also alluding to formal trainings and learnings in organizations on how that can stimulate. But I think to your point, it is about also putting it into practice as much as.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to training, 100%. Trainings are important. Formal structure, formal interactions are important, but they go only a little way if there is no internal confidence that one can pull it off. That confidence comes when you have your group, when you have your system that ensures you see role models, you become someone's role model. You know, you mentor someone, you get mentored. That's what lifts the whole formal training. Formal training in itself can take you a little, ahead, but there's more to it.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn to you, Mohit, because coming from an organization that has a rich history and demonstrated, put its money where its mouth is when it comes to this topic. I'm sure there would have probably also been challenges, or you are probably seeing some challenges in present-day context as you are growing. So what are some of those, and how have you worked with it?
Before answering that, I just want to say what Tanya mentioned. She threw some numbers that how Gen Z is willing to buy sustainable products. So this is music to ears at a higher cost, because we produce a lot of sustainable products. And one of the challenges is that, is the Indian consumer ready to pay a little more, because, it comes at a cost. And if that is the case, that is how, we'll bring the cost down, and, our whole society will become sustainable. In terms of challenges, I think I'll mention 2. Perhaps the biggest challenge is perception. We are very stereotype in our minds, and as a society I'm talking, that, maybe men can do this, women can do this, North Indians can do this, South Indians can do this. Obviously, there is nothing like that. The most common example is women in our households, and everyone thinks that they are best at in the kitchen. But if you look at outside, all the great chefs, a lot of them are men. So obviously, men are not bad at cooking, but we have already, stereotyped, them in a certain way. And that is, probably across the industry. When we talk about shop floors, just give a chance to women. Maybe they will fail. And then it comes to meritocracy, and which should be, above everything else. But at least give them a chance, because most of the times, we are stereotyping, and without that, we are not even giving a chance. I think the other factor is that, we focus a lot on output. Whether it is the gender ratio, whether it is, diversity, this, that. But the real problem is with the input. If you improve the input, obviously the output will increase. And, if let's say in a certain organization you have only 20% female applicants and 80% male, obviously it is almost impossible to get to a gender ratio, which is balanced. So a lot needs to be done, at the beginning. Nagma mentioned about, some numbers in the education sector. But I think, as you move up in the hierarchy, there are a lot more dropouts. And dropouts, I don't mean, just at the education level. The real thing comes after that, whether you're ready to go in the formal job sector or not. And that is where, our society and the perceptions need to improve. And those are the challenges, which we also face, almost on a daily basis. We are not, allude to those kind of challenges. In terms of, perception, let me give you a personal example, which happened with me last week. So it was Independence Day celebrations, in our apartments. And I met this guy. I was meeting him for the first time. He said, what's your name, what you do? So I said, I'm Mohit, I do this, that. And he said, what's your full name? And I generally, casually said that, I'm Mohit only, let's talk something more, good to meet you. But he said, but what's your full name? So he asked me, a couple of times. Obviously, he was trying to make a perception of me, given my surname and not my name. I could sense that, and I also didn't give my name. And I said, this is good enough. I don't give my surname, if it is not required. And obviously, I have nothing to hide. It's right there. But the point was that, he was trying to make a perception, not by knowing me, but knowing my surname. And that is, how our societies generally work. And I think, we need to break those barriers. And as Rumjung was saying that, it's not only left to corporates, it's for the society, it's for the government, it's everyone at large, which have to come along and work on this.
Yes, not just unconscious bias, but trying to form a conscious bias there through name. I'm aware of time a little bit, so I would ask you perhaps quickly to touch on, because it's super interesting, Priya, also that you have worked with the, changing and influencing also a little bit to what Mohit spoke to with Ikea, to your suppliers and extended the efforts. So maybe a short kind of input on how did that work out? Was it easy to do? Or
Sure. So I think supplier diversity is what we're talking about. So very quickly, of course, Cargill is a company which believes from farm to fork. So for us, it's a supply chain is very, very important. And I'm talking about, of course, there's a conscious effort behind actually investing in the communities, which then ultimately also helps in enforcing the supplier diversity. So one of the examples I gave about the poultry farmers being women, and then of course they subsequently form part of a larger pool of suppliers from which we take. I would probably quote one more example. So like for example, we're talking about diversity in terms of gender or PWD, but globally, and Cargill being an American-centered organization, racial diversity is very, very big for them, for us rather. So in Americas, for example, it is basically representation of minorities in the workforce. So Cargill in US, in North America, has basically tied up with National Black Growers Association, basically which comprises of farmers of colored backgrounds, and through which the supplier diversity again reinforces. So I think, yes, to a very short answer, yes it is. But having said that, I think there are few, one is it is a very intended and very purposeful commitment to this. When I say this, it takes money, it takes effort, it takes time. Because this diversity is not readily available for us to pick and choose, and it is not something that, like, for example, Mohit gave a very stark this thing, the applicants, and hiring is a similar, similar process. 2080. So similarly, supplier diversity, it's not easily available. So sometimes the intent goes behind not just onboarding a diverse supplier, it is about developing that whole infra, and then the pool gets developed to further diversify. So yes, short answer, definitely yes. However, it takes time, money, commitment, and the intent to kind of keep going this. And it would probably, this whole infra to build up also takes a considerable amount of time to really build to a stage where we could, probably the flow is much better.
Thanks. And then I will close with two questions. One to you, Tanya, you spoke a lot also about data. How is it that you measure impact? Question to you, and rounding off with you, Sangeeta, afterwards on, how do you have a specific way in which you communicate about your D&I efforts?
So I'll keep it short. When I was leading diversity, equity and inclusion in my organization, and I institutionalized a DEI dashboard. Primarily, it is just a reflection to the business leaders of the demography of their own population, which they don't see often. So for example, as simple as persons with disability, 0, 0, 0 in technology, 0 in HR, 0 in internal audit. And we kept it that way. We do have, we have about 1% of persons with disability in NatWest Group India, which absolutely we shouldn't be proud about, and we should be looking at doing more. And the dashboard helped us accelerate our recruitment strategy on PWDs and hiring more PWDs, because no business leader would want to see a dashboard with a 0 number. They love numbers, and we showed them that. On the other hand, we also have a gender slate, which is clearly calling about the gender ratio in each of the leadership level. So we have a target of ensuring that vice president and director level, we have a women representation of at least 30% by the year 2025. And since the time we started having that dashboard and the target, each of the business unit, whether it is technology, whether it is commercial banking, whether it is personal banking, franchisee, or any operations, they all geared about ensuring that they develop and promote and recruit people at the senior level. And we see the needle movement. Currently, we are at 40% gender ratio as an organization, but technology team is worried that because we are recruiting more of engineers, the overall gender ratio may fall below 40%. So these are some of the challenges, but at the same time, once we have a dashboard there, once we have a gender slate there, it solves the purpose of what we try to achieve in the demography of the organization.
Usha, you spoke about what metrics and how do we measure DEI in most organizations. My experience has been that most of the time it is about intake. So what proportion of your intake is PWDs or women or LGBTQ? But I think there's much more. We have to handhold that group of the minority communities within an organization to the entire organization. We have to look at the attrition data and see, are we losing more of the marginalized groups? Is it voluntary? Is it involuntary? When it comes to performance management, we have to do a deep dive to understand, are they actually being rated without any bias? Are they being counseled? Are they being helped? Are they making the promotions happen? So there is a lot more than just doing a thing on saying how many have I.
Yes. And employee sentiment.
Yes.
So I think most organizations here and also our organization would measure employee sentiment. Do we have inclusion as one of the criteria in measuring employee sentiment? Clearly we do have. And a lot of action gets taken around the data that we receive from our colleagues.
Yeah, leadership pipeline and pay gap are the two other very important ones. I don't think we have our eyes on that.
Very quickly, in a minute, Sangeeta.
So communication, of course, there are two aspects to how we communicate. Within the organization, it was extremely important to be able to set the tone. And now that we were looking at people who needed slightly different handling from the types of customers that they were used to. So we've had an extensive training program and it goes out to every single person who joins the organization, goes through a complete module on how to handle people with various disabilities. There are refresher courses that happen within the year because ours is an industry with a very high turnover rate. Especially at the cinema level. To the customer, it's very important that the customer knows about the various facilities that are available, and we use various methods to do that. We use social media extensively. We use our in-house panels extensively. And just recently, in fact, not for this particular initiative, but we use the power of cinema to create sensitivity and engagement with customers inspiring them to make sustainable life choices. And this was a short clip that was done with Bhumi Petnekar at the center. Of course, she did it as her in the capacity of being a climate warrior. So going forward, we will be using similar methodologies to, of course, that's cutting into our revenue because advertising is a key revenue source for cinema. Nevertheless, whenever there is inventory available, we will continue to use cinema as a medium for our sustainability initiatives as well.
Thank you. Yes, I can see a few hands up. Clearly, this is a topic that, that evokes a lot of responses. I know we are short of, can we go 5? Maybe. No, 5 minutes, okay? Okay, then I will just take 2 questions. Can we have the gentleman?
Recently, I've been told, because I'm a person with disabilities, but I have a lot of colleagues, not colleagues, acquaintances, who have this problem, and when they apply to different organizations, especially MNCs, one question comes out down there which offends them or they feel uncomfortable. Do you have any disability? Do you require, or does it require that some modification to the workplace needs to be done? So I thought I'll sensitize you to this question. People are feeling very uncomfortable when they apply. Although down there, there's a disclaimer, this will not be used, etc., and so on, but it is something that affects people.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Can I just respond to that? In fact, my organization has it, and I'm hearing this from you. It is done with the intention to ensure that the support, the right support is given in terms of accessibility, but point taken in terms of how it is perceived by the individual from the community, which is important.
Yes. No. Also asking, does the workplace have to be modified? That could be an eliminating question. So you can ask if you got a disability,
Yeah, most
as we requires it for. But only after they're selected, then you look at whether you need to change the workplace.
But what about for the interview process also? Sometimes there's some kind of assistance might be required for a candidate.
Then at that time, it can be, at that moment you take a decision, no? Whether you want to lift the person, you want to meet the person elsewhere.
I think let's take the input. I think it's a valid input to also look at it from a user experience perspective. So unfortunately, we don't have time to take more questions, but the panelists are available outside. Thank you, dear panelists, for a very engaging discussion and throwing a lot of light on the topic, and something that I am sure we are going to come back to many more times in future sustainability conferences. Thanks, everyone.
With this, we conclude this session. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guests for the insightful discussion. I kindly request all our speakers to gather in for a group photograph.